We'll be talking about string operations, kind of formatting strings, merging text, programmatic operations. I have a few demos here, and I will spare you guys some slides because I prepared this webinar only this morning before in the last couple hours. So yeah, we'll skip the slides and we'll just do some demos, some explanation. I hope you guys have some good questions. So away we go. In my other browser tab, I have the NG client running, and I'm going to take you guys through some formatting examples. I will show you how the format was applied, then we'll look back at the IDE under the hood, and we'll see what was done there. So let's start with dates. This is a pretty common one. By default, your dates get formatted no matter what because we have to display them as text, as something. But as you all know, a date really encodes a lot more information than what you see in the text. You get a date object is up to the millisecond, and of course it includes things like time zones and that sort of thing. So how to display your date? By default, it gets formatted, and this is perhaps one thing that a lot of people don't understand is that no matter what, your date gets formatted, so you might as well do something with it. The default, if you do nothing, will be that the date is in the locale of the user who's using. So I'm in the US, and it's going to show me the US format, which is month, day, year, and it's going to give me the AM, PM. So you can see that month, day, 2-digit year, AM, PM is the default locale format. Now, if you want to enforce a date format globally in your application, you can go to your server admin page, and I will do that with localhost Servoy admin. And right at the top, you will see default date format. You can put in something. I will put in still the US format, but minus the time, for example, and also a 4-digit year. I'm going to save the settings. Now I do have to relaunch my client for that to take effect. I'll just do that real quick. And you can see now that it's showing the 4-digit year and also no time. So at the very least, if you want to force a date format onto your users, then you can do that. Now, of course, we can override that on a column by column basis for database tables and also on a field by field level in the UI. So let's take a look. We have a basic format here, and I'm going to take you under the hood and show you what it looks like. So here I have applied that format, but I've also set the input format. The format is really a string property, so you can always set it directly as the string. But if you're like me, you can never get it right the first time, so you should use the editor. And you can see that for dates, we can specify a standard date or type in our own, a standard format or type in our own, and also what kind of edit format you want. So let's say I want to allow my users to just type in the numbers without the separators. So you can see as I click in the field, the separators go away, and I can go ahead and type a date without any separators. And once I leave the field, it will format it. Over on the right-hand side, you can see I'm showing the raw value. An example that I see a lot is where people want to sort of leave the separators there so that while a user types in the date, they can kind of forget about the separators, because sometimes the user's confused about whether or not she or he should type in the separators. So in the next example you have here, you can see that as I start typing in the date, the separators are filled in for me, and it prompts me what I should put in there. In the separator example, you can see that it's followed by the mask property. So if we look at this in the editor, once you've entered the display format, if you check this checkbox to use the mask, it'll sort of apply the input mask while your user's typing. In the next example, I have applied a placeholder, and so this could be a character or one character that gets repeated or a sequence of characters that will get substituted in all of the places. So if we look at what this looks like in the UI, you can see that as I clear the field, so as I'm typing, you can see that it gets replaced, and the date is entered. Another thing we might want to do is separate date and time, although date and time are in a single column, or a single, in this case, this is bound to a form variable. The value stores both the date and the time as a single data type. However, it's common to see that split up, where you choose a date and then you choose a time, even though it's really talking to the same data provider. So what we can do is apply a time format, and you can see for this format, I've applied hours and minutes, and I've put in a placeholder here, and I've applied the input mask. So if we want to take a look at what happens there, so this date was starting at midnight, but I can go ahead and put in a time, say 11:10, and you can see that, well, if I show the raw value, then you can see how it's stored, but it's stored all in one object. I could do this probably by putting this back to the default, which will show my locale. So if I relaunch the client, now you can see that it's going to show the time in the raw value. This is a 24-hour time format. You can also change that to use the common North American format, which has the AM PM. You could substitute that in. Oop. I put in 2 characters for that. I think it's just 1. I can never remember. The nice thing is that as you make changes, you can see the client is broadcasted to, and I don't have to do any kind of rebuilding or anything. So now you can see that I can enter the time. Oop. This is a bit tricky. Oh, I need to change to the lowercase. So you have to change the number format as well as the AM PM, and then you get kind of your North American notation. You get the idea. You can also do 2-digit years on the input. I would say be careful. So you can see that in my display format, I show 4-digit year, but on the input, I accept a 2-digit year. I've had this request a lot in the past on how to do this. It is possible, but I would say be careful, because you can see that if I put in, say, 19, it goes to 2019. But let's say it's a date of birth, and I put in someone who's born in 1929, and it's interpreting that as 2029. So you have that kind of Y2K issue going on there. If I put something more in the recent past, say 1977, it determines it. So you can see that there's actually a cycle of when the start of the century is in the date formatting. It's configurable, but your users don't know what it's going to be. So I would say be very careful with this this kind of input. I've had people insist that they have to have it anyway. So if you do, then just be careful. Okay, let's move on from dates to formatting numbers. So here we have a data type which is, say, holding a dollar amount. By default, again, it's going to take your locale if you have no other formatting. So I'm in the North American format, so the separator is the comma and the decimal is the period. In, say, a European format, that gets reversed. So of course, if I was in a European locale on my machine here, it would switch it dynamically for me without any work. That would just happen. Again, like the date format, you can override that on the app server and push this to your client. So I could specify a number format and then insist that clients see it in a specific way. And there's use cases for that. Let's take a look at a basic formatter. So even, I would point out that even if you apply no format, you can see that this truncates to 3 digits in the decimal place over here. Now, of course, I can override that in my, like I said, in my server configuration, or I can apply it directly on the field. But by default, your number is always formatted, whether or not you like it. So you might as well pick a format, at least globally. You can see down below here, though, that it formats it with a 5.7. It also is rounding in the format, even though the underlying value that gets stored in the database is still the 3-digit. If we look at the number format example, you can see that we specify the separator with a comma, the interval at which we separate the thousands, and then the decimal placeholder. You can invert these and get the European format, for example. We're also limiting it to 2 decimal places. I could increase that, and upon saving this, you can see now that the full number is shown. So you can configure the number of decimal places, the separator, and the decimal character. Of course, you can add a currency symbol. Again, it will take the locale that you use. So if you want to just let it default to the user's locale, you'll insert this currency symbol as a prefix. Now, what some people will do is they don't want to use the default currency or the default locale as the currency, because maybe they're actually storing the currency, and then they really want to put it into the format. In that case, you can prefix it with a real character. So I think this should work. So you can see that it doesn't use my locale, but it does use dollar hard-coded. So you can prefix any hard-code any prefix that you want into your format. By the way, if I want to enter the number in here, you can see that when I select in the field, that the currency symbol goes away, and I can just enter my raw value with as many decimals as I want. And again, it reformats it when I leave field. We can format percentages as well. If you put nothing else and just put the percentage, it actually will go in front of the number. Common format that I see is where it goes after. So you can put a prefix here with the number of digits that you want and the percentage sign. Again, you don't have to have the percent in the input part as well. So you can see when I click in the field, it really goes to the decimal, because the percentages should be a decimal. So if I put in something else, 99%, for example, it will reformat it when I leave the field. Finally, you can also do scientific notation. So for, say, a large number here, like 9 billion something, we can force scientific notation, and you have some control over how big of a number you need before it gets formatted. But you can see that once I click in the field, again, I'm free to type whatever number I want. And as I tab out, you can see it casts it back to the scientific notation. The formatter for that looks a bit like this. You can see the display format is showing the number of digits that you want to have before it's going to go to scientific notation, and then this indicates that you're going to do the scientific notation, and this is the exponent here. Okay, let's move on to formatting text values. So a lot of numbers are stored in databases as text. yet they need to carry with them or show some kind of format. A simple example would be something like a phone number. So North American phone number, we want to have, say we want to have the country calling code and then the 10-digit phone number, and we separate it 3, 3, and 4. So you can see that as I clear the field and I start typing, again, it gives me the input mask. I'm just sort of forcing the +1 country code in there so that there's no confusion. You don't have to type it. We can decide to store it or not. And you can see that on leave a field, it reformats it. An example I see sometimes in ERP systems, for example, accounting systems where they have a chart of accounts and they have really specific formats for account numbers. Sometimes it's like part of a company code concatenated with an account number or something like that. From time to time we get that, and the user needs to enter it in a specific format, and we might want to reformat it when they leave. So let's take a look under the hood at the string formats we have here. By the way, the phone format looks something like this. So we have the numbers, we have whatever separators we want in there, and we have a placeholder. You saw the X that was being replaced there. It works just like the date and the number formatters. But for example, this strange account number format, say we want to force that the user can enter any letter for the first 2 spaces and then any number for the last 3. So here we're going to do UU, which means it's going to push it, it's going to force it to uppercase too. So any letter, and it gets forced to uppercase. This is the placeholder. This is what the user sees that gets replaced as they type. So if we look at how this works, I'm typing lowercase b and lowercase b again. You can see it's replacing it, and it's also forcing it to uppercase. If I type anything other than a number here, it won't take. So here you can hear I'm typing some letters. It's not going in. I need to put a number like that. Once I exceed the length or hit the length, you can hear that I'm typing more, and it stops it right at that strict format. So we see this a lot in older ERP systems, and it's a good way to force the kind of data entry that you want. Of course, your users should also be trained and know that format, but that's usually the case with those kinds of systems. Another example of that in this one is showing it with the placeholder, but in this case, it's really going to restrict what you can substitute for the asterisk. So here, the asterisk means that this will get replaced with something the user enters. Here again, this is just what the user sees as they're typing, and it's replaced. These are the values that are allowed to be typed in the place of these 2 asterisks. So here what we're saying is anything in the first 2 characters from this set, A, B, or C, and then any number after that for 3 characters. So let's take a look in the client. So here I'm going to put AC, and you can see that it works. If I type in AD, it won't accept it. And then of course any number it'll take, but nothing else, and then it'll truncate it after the 5 digits. So that really forces the user to put in the correct format. There are cases where the formats don't do everything that you want. For that, you can have a custom UI converter. So we have an example of that. In the custom conversion example, you can see that for the format, I'm going to use a UI converter, and I don't know why this gets truncated. There's actually 3 things here. It gets cut off at the bottom, but I'll show you the methods. So it actually runs it through your own code, and it passes in the value that is coming in from the UI and how you want to store it back to the database or back to the data provider. and then also the other direction. So as it's coming out of the database, how do you want to format it so it's displayed in the UI? And you just hook it up to these two methods to sort of scrub it on its way in and out. So I'll jump into the code here and show you those methods. You can see that on the way from the database to the UI, we're going to format it. This is going to be a numeric value, and so and I'm doing a bit of programmatic formatting here, and I wanted to use this as an example to also point that out. So we're going to format this number just as a normal North American format number, and say we're doing kilograms, so we're going to add kg to it on the way out, just to do that. On the way back in, we're going to accept numeric input, and we're going to parse out a number from it if they've entered a number. So let's have a look at what this looks like in the UI. So you can see that the value in the database, or in this case a form variable, is 123. I could do add a decimal to it. You can see that it's formatting it over here. So if the raw value changes, say record per record, you can see that it's formatted here. Here, if I just enter in some numbers, and you can see on leave of field, it gets formatted again, because it goes back to the database, but then it calls that method again to reformat it as well. So really, it's just passing it through to make sure that you have a chance to do whatever you need to, both on the way into the database and on the way out of the database. I would stress that using the UI converters is not a very common occurrence. So I would first look for all other ways to do formatting before doing that. A common approach is also to use a calculation and just return, if it doesn't require data input, just return a calculated value that does the format. But it does come in handy when you absolutely need it. The other thing I would point out here is that we're calling utils.number format. This is a base API that you get with Servoy. Utils can do number formatting, date formatting, string formatting for you. So we're sort of programmatically doing here what we normally do statically in the UI. In another example here, I want to show that formats can be dynamic. So what you've seen so far is that I apply a format at design time to a field, but you can change formats at runtime if you want. I tried to make up a little use case for that here. And what I'm doing is, again, I have a phone number. I want to select a country, and then based on what I select, I'm going to change the format. So we have a North American number here. I'm going to pick Netherlands, and as I start typing in here, I get the Dutch country calling code sort of substituted in there for me, and I think this is the right format. I had to look it up. They have one less digit than we do when I put in the Dutch phone number. So here's how we can dynamically change formats. And this was actually the use case that prompted me to do the webinar. We had some questions about formatting phone numbers, and this came up, so I thought I'd show this one, that you can dynamically switch it. In code, it looks like this. So let's follow the data change event of that country code combo box there. So when we choose between one or the other, and we apply it directly to the element. So elements.phone, that's the text field that holds the phone number, and that format is just a string property, and it gets applied. We can apply it dynamically, and if it's US, we do this format, and if it's the other one, which is Netherlands, this format. So that's how we can do dynamic formatting. A couple other examples of working with text. We're going to move away from formatting now to working with text in merging and sort of programmatic processing. I have a few examples of that here as well. Anywhere you can show text in Servoy, you can mash it up with data. You can mash it up with formatted data. You can mash it up with HTML markup, and you can mash it up with internationalization, so dynamic language translations. We did a whole other webinar on what we call I18N, or internationalization, a few months ago, so hit the archives if you want to know more about that. We'll focus here on the other items I just mentioned. So looking at this form right here, I would want you guys to notice that a couple of things. As I click through the records, you can see that I have some text up here and down here, which is data driven, and also down at the bottom. These are not fields, so these are labels. And in particular, they are mashing up plain text with data-driven text. So you can see the order and then the number and then the customer up here, and then down here the order items and then the actual number of order items that are on the order. And then down below you can see the order total and then the formatted dollar amount. So let's have a look at that under the hood. I am going to go to the form called order detail, and I'm going to have a look at this. And I use the wireframe viewer here. You could also view it in the HTML5 editor, but it's a bit faster to sort of click around and show you what is what here. So let's take a look at the header label. This is just a plain label that you can drag and drop on your form. But if we look at the text that goes in here, you see this sort of mishmash of tags and text. If we click on this, we get the text editor. And this is a standard editor that you get anywhere you can show text and you can edit it in Servoy, you get this editor. So this applies not just to labels, but to anywhere you can see text. And you can see what I've done is I've sort of concatenated the plain text order with the order ID of the record, the current record. And so when you saw that I switched, I didn't have to write any code to handle the record selection change or whatever. This just applies to the current record. And again, you can pick anything from your data model. So you can see that when I want to find the customer name, I use a relation and I use that to get my company. And I can just sort of find the tag I want here and double click and it inserts it over here. One thing to note is that you have to also click the display tags checkbox here. Otherwise, it will literally display the %, whatever, and it doesn't get dynamically substituted. So you want to make sure you do that. Down here, same thing. The only difference is that I would show you that I use a tag here. If I go to my orders to order details related found set, and I go down to standard tags, I can pick the max record index or lazy max record index. They give you the same thing, it's just how they're loaded is different. And you can see that it pops that tag over when I double click on it. So that gets substituted in there and it evaluates the size of that related found set, telling me the number of order items I have. Down on the bottom here, it's the same thing. However, I would point out that this is just showing a calculation, which gives me a formatted value, and I'll jump into that in a second. I would also point out that we're starting to sneak a little bit of HTML markup in here to embolden the order. You can see on the client that the order total here is a little bit bold, and that's done by just sort of sneaking in a little bit of markup here. So you can inject markup anywhere you have text as well and sort of mash it in with all the other stuff that you're doing. And I have a better example of that in a minute. Let's take a quick look at that order total. I think it's display order total. This is a calculation, which looks kind of like a field, but it runs some code. And again, I'm calling that utils.number format and giving it my currency formatter here, along with the separator and the decimal and the number of places to separate at. So again, there are times when you need to format numbers and dates and things, but you need to do it at runtime and show it somewhere dynamically. And so you want to call that utils, formatting API. And if you put that in a calculation, it shows up everywhere just like a data provider. So you can pop it into some merge text and use it there. Real quick, I would just point out that everywhere else here we're applying format as well. One thing that I wanted to show you guys, for example, notice the order date. I formatted this with the International Standard year, month, day. And I want to point out something on that form. I'll switch to the HTML view real quick. So on this form, if I select the date column here and look at the properties, you'll notice that I didn't specify a format. You'll also remember that my format, my default format for the server that I was pushing to clients was the North American format, month, day, year. So how did year, month, day get into this column? Because I did that on purpose. And the way this works is you can set a default format. I got to move my GoToMeeting thing my way. There we go. I can set a default format at the column level. So now we're looking at the orders table. If I select order date, you can see that the default format here is year, day, month. It should be year, month, day. Anyway, so that overrides the server setting and the locale, but it is overridden by anything that if I put a format directly on that field, it would then override the column level. But this is really nice if you have certain, this works really well for numbers too, because some numbers are currencies, other numbers are, metric weights or something like that. So if you want to do that at the column level, that's a really convenient place to make sure that it gets formatted everywhere in your application the way you want to. Another trick that I would point out, this is maybe an advanced tip here, you can integrate this with I18N, and instead of putting a literal format here, you can put an I18N key that gets translated dynamically into a format, and then you can have different different formats applied specifically on a column by column level depending on the locale. So you could have a different, phone number format applied that way, or a different weight measure applied that way, or something like that, currency, etc. Let's take a look at some markup examples. I'm getting a bit over time, so I'll speed up here and then we'll take questions. I got just 2 more examples. You saw a little bit that I was putting some bold around one of those labels. I just want to show you that you can mash up data and HTML however much you want. So you can see here, if I change this value, as I tab out, you can see the green area here is showing it highlighted, and then it gives you the rest. Take a look at what that looks like in, what's the name of the form? This guy. So you can see, first of all, that I just drop a label on here. Anywhere that you can put text, you can mix markup and data and HTML, markup and data and international text. And you can see here that I put the tag, which gets substituted. This is just coming from a form variable. And then I put a bit of markup here, and I use a style class from my attached style sheet just around the variable, and then I put some plain text here. But some people really take advantage of this, and they put really nice formatted HTML pieces throughout their application, but they're dynamically substituting in whatever data they need or whatever localized strings they need. And you also notice that all I need to do is bind this text field to the data provider, which was just a form variable I called text, and everything else happened automatically. There's no need to catch the change event in code and refresh the label or anything like that. It's just data bound, and that's already pre-formatted, and it just works. Last example. I call this dynamic tags for lack of a better word, but again, I'm just trying to show in these examples that the things that you can do at design time, you can also do programmatically. So the example I have here is, I don't know, let's say as I double click on one of these one of these orders, I want to see some order info in a dialog here, and you can see it's showing me a bit about each one of these orders, who the customer was, the date, and the dollar amount. Let's have a look at the code. This is dynamic tags, on cell double click, so I'm handling the event on that grid when we click on it. And you can see here that I just make a little array of messages. The thing that I would point out here is this is just plain string. Inside I have the tag that you would have put in the editor somewhere. And of course, I'm putting a little bit of markup around it too to embolden the value. I just sort of put these in array, and then I call .join, which is a standard method of a JavaScript array, which concatenates all the items of the array with a string. And in this case, I use the break tag. Again, that's a bit of markup so that they're separated by new lines. And so that gives me a string here called messages. Then I call this is that utils library again, and I call replace tags. And so what that does is it takes all of these % tags and it replaces them dynamically with a value from a context, the context being whatever you pass in as the second argument. So right now it's the found set, and really the current selected record of the found set gets replaced, but that could be some record that you got passed in from somewhere else, etc. So point is anytime you want to dynamically substitute data into some text that you're going to see somewhere in the UI and you're doing it programmatically, use this string replace tags. It's pretty nice. You can have fully, use case of this would be like email templates or something. You could have the user define their own email templates with nice markup and etc. And if they just put in the tags here like dear first name, last name, etc., dynamically you just call this replace tags and it gets filled in. Finally, I just show it in a dialog here and it just shows up nice in the UI like that. That is my final example. I do see we have some questions and we're a bit over time. So Jan, what do we have?
Well, thanks. This is a pretty detailed overview of everything with formatting and merging of text. So that's quite helpful for the archives. A couple of questions. There's one here from Tony, and he has an example that I've seen many years in the past in other environments. Can you allow the entry of a custom text that then can be converted to a date? For example, in a date field, enter AT, and it gets converted to today.
That's convenient. Yeah, so not in a standard format that you just stick in at design time, but if you create one of those custom converters, and those can be global methods that you could reuse throughout your application, then you can apply that to be handled anywhere where you want to enter a date. You can accept that format and convert it.
Right. So with a custom converter, you can build anything, and you can make it as insane as you want to.
Exactly.
And his follow-up question is: can you enter just the day part of a date and leave the rest out and tab out? And then have it auto-filled. So you have a date field, you only put in 12 and it takes the 12th of the current month.
Yeah, I don't know if you might be able to put in just DD as your format, and then it will just change the date of an existing date. For an empty date, I don't know what happens. You'd have to try it out. Regardless, if it doesn't work, you can again use a custom UI converter.
Okay, so yeah, if you want to go very crazy, then use a custom converter and build whatever you want to. And can you use a regular expression?
You can use a regular expression for formatting and for matching. However, the regex won't be applied in the client as they're typing. So if you have some regex and it will only accept things they type if they match the regex, and it will do it real time, that would have to be done in a custom component. But of course, you can apply it after the fact through a custom converter, and we've seen that before, where you check the regex against the what was entered, say an email or something. So this would be on leave of field, for example. You get it right away that you can match that to the regex and know if it matched or if it didn't.
Okay. And a question from Richard: can you display a list of invoice values with the correct currency symbol for each customer?
Yes. It depends on where you store the currency, but again, you can see that you can sort of mash up data-driven stuff together. Probably I would just do that in a calculation where you get the currency symbol for the customer and you concatenate it with a formatted dollar amount for the field that you want to format, and you return it as that. If you need to accept input, well, then you probably don't want to accept a currency symbol on the input. So you would just take a normal numeric input. The currency is stored separately.
Okay. Well, guys, last minute to ask any final questions that you have. Does any of this apply to tooltips?
Yes, that was one example that I wanted to get to, but I ran out of time preparing this stuff, and by the looks of the time, I kind of crammed too much content in here anyway. But again, the point is anywhere you can show text in Servoy, it can be markup, it can be data-driven, it can be localized, and it can all be mashed together. And that applies to tooltips as well. So we see some customers do some very nice tooltips. Say you hover over an order here, and it shows a nice HTML formatted summary of that order. That's a nice way to use tooltips and everything that you just saw.